and welcome to the Rustler Incorporated Mr Brim Counseling Service Meeting. Today we have Pooh here, Tigger here with his usual pea bowl, and then Harvey here on the other side of the table. So today I'll be talking about Mr Brim's counseling service, but before we get into this presentation that you see here, I am going to open up the note-taking app so that we can start talking about things that have been going on at the Mr. Brim. So I'm going to create a new section. Sorry about this, guys. I haven't prepared the OneNote section yet. Mr. Brim Counseling. Okay. Mr. Brim Counseling Meeting number 1. Alright, so let's begin this meeting. Okay, so the Mr. Brim Counseling Service has been getting quite overloaded lately. So we need to find a way to fix that. So I've been trying to devise a way to make sure Mr. Brim's not screaming at all of our employees, because I know some of you have gotten screamed at by that guy sometimes. So we need to this is very important, we need to devise a way to mellow Mr. Brim and make sure he doesn't shout at Rustler employees too much, because as a result of him being overloaded. So I would say, yes, Polly? Yes, I suggest talking to Mr. Brim and talking about expanding his office, making it bigger, and then maybe hiring extra clients, so that maybe he can be lighten the load, spread it out maybe, I don't know. It seems like a reasonable idea. I'm going to add that. Possible idea. I'm going to add from Harvey, just so that I know that you did it, Harvey. So, what you said was expand well, first of all, talk with Mr. Brim and negotiate with him to expand his office and hire more counselors in his building to lighten the load and reduce the chance of him going crazy during a session with a Rustler employee, for example. Sounds like a good idea. We'll see if it works out. Now you can see Tigger has something to say.
Yes, I'd like to say that maybe we should try counseling Mr. Brim himself. Mr. Brim seems to have some problems where he flips out once in a while, goes a little bit crazy, and I don't know. So I think we just get Mr. Brim to counsel himself. Find a therapist for Mr. Brim so that maybe he can get more better, so that he can counsel our employees correctly. It's something like that. Alright, that sounded like a good idea. Let's see, so what you said, possible idea from Tigger, get Mr. Brim a therapist for himself so that he can act better and be a more mellow counselor for our Rustler employees. Maybe even get Mr. Brim a counselor for himself. So we'll see about that. I'm not sure Mr. Brim will be so up to the task, but we'll see. Okay, so the next thing we need to do on the whole Mr. Brim situation is we need to make sure our employees actually get something out of these Mr. Brim meetings. So we need to do long-term analysis, for example. We need to put up analysis programs so that we know exactly what's going on in these Mr. Brim meetings, and that we know exactly how our employees are doing and how they're coming out after each meeting. Let me write that down before we start asking people for ideas. Let's see. What did I just say? I can't believe I forgot already. Okay. So we need to create a system to monitor our employees during their session so that they know, so that we know, we know exactly how they're doing and that they're actually getting something out of these Mr. Brim counseling sessions. Or may not be getting anything out of these. That's what we're trying to get, you know, out of the sessions. Okay, so now let's look for ideas. Let me sort of put it this. Oh, that's Pig. Oh, not Pig. Pooh. Yes. I'd like to suggest that we put up security cameras inside Mr. Brim's office and turn them on only when Mr. Brim is going to talk to our employees. Now, that's a very good idea. Hopefully, Mr. Brim will flip out over it, but I suggest try it. It sounds like a good idea, you know. Just put high definition security cameras up there and report to us. We can look out of here so we can see what Mr. Brim is doing to our employees. Alright, sounds like good. So, we have possible ID from Pooh. Okay, set up security cameras so that we can see what Mr. Brim is doing with our employees during the sessions. Also, you said, Pooh, that only turn them on when Mr. Brim is visiting and counseling our employees, because otherwise he might notice it and get pretty ticked off about it. Now, he might get a little bit ticked off about it, even if he notices it, and we are only recording our employees at that moment. Okay, now we have an idea from Harvey. Okay, so what I suggest is getting a little bit of a analytics data monitoring system where we kind of hack into Mr. Brim's system so that we can quickly and easily see what Mr. Brim's doing. Like we can hack onto his laptop, for example, or his computer, or whatever he uses, or even his phone. You know, we can get onto there and we can just like get analytics, and we can just like do stuff that way. We can see what he's been doing. We can actually utilize the computer's camera if it has one, for example. Alright, that's a pretty plausible idea though. I'll explain why in a minute. Possible idea from Harvey. So you said attempt to hack into Mr. Brim's systems, e.g. computers, laptops, even smartphones, so that we can gather data about what Mr. Brim's been doing, so that we can see how our employees are getting counseled. Okay, so now we're going to talk about why this might not be such a great idea. So Mr. Brim is quite fond of catching people red-handed, and if we engage in this, Mr. Brim might get pretty upset and boot us out and refuse to work with any Rustler employees ever again. And we certainly don't want that, right? So let's add that. Let's see. However, the problem with this idea is that Mr. Brim, just like I explained, is very fond of catching people red-handed. And if he finds out that we've been hacking into his devices, he might go a little bit crazy. More than a little bit in some cases. A little bit crazy. And refuse to work with any Rustler employees ever again. Alright, and that's all the time we have for ideas. So those are the two things we need to do. So we need to devise a way to mellow Mr. Brim, and make sure he doesn't shout at Rustler employees too much as a result of him being overloaded. So then we need to create a system to monitor our employees during their sessions to see how exactly they're doing and if they're actually getting something out of these Mr. Brim counseling sessions. Or may not be getting anything out of them at all.
Now, I'll look over these two ideas and I'll see which one will be best. But before we get into that, I'll do that after this meeting. And you guys can work on those two ideas after the meeting too. We need to get into the Mr. Brim Counseling presentation. So let me go ahead and turn off the lights here so we can have a better viewing. Okay, so I am actually going to get into keyboard light mode. Alright. So, let's begin the Mr. Brim Counseling Service slideshow, hosted through Rustler Technologies, Brim Counseling Incorporated. Benefits of using Mr. Brim's counseling service, Brim Counsels Incorporated. It is cheaper than most other counseling services. The Base Express plan only costs $27 per hour, compared to competing providers $40 per hour for their base plan. Next, freedom of choices. The Mr. Brim Counseling Service provides 5 plans: Express, Professional, Extreme, and 2 all-day options, Normal and Extreme. Adaptive patience level. Depending on which plan you choose, Mr. Brim can prepare himself to experience great degrees of annoyance and can even adjust his personality. Most other services do not offer this option. Swimming pool. At the end of an all-day session, Mr. Brim decides if the patient has done well enough to take a swim in the swimming pool. This is a very rare feature of a counseling service. It is also convenient for Rustler employees. The Mr. Brim Counseling Office is in the same building as the Rustler Technologies building. If an employee wants to start service with Mr. Brim, it's very close by, and he has a variety of after-work slots. Note: Mr. Brim's counseling service will not be available on Labor Day, Memorial Day, or Christmas. Contact 972-350-6883 for more information. Visit https://brimcounsels.rustler.com or email brimcounsels@rustler.com. Office address: 6 Counseling Way, Fort Worth, Texas, 75034. Open Monday to Saturday. Next, here we have the counseling plans. Now this table, we have plan type, we have Express, Professional, Extreme, All-Day Normal, and All-Day Extreme. So we also have price. You can see all the prices, the basis, once per week for 8 months, for example. The crankiness level on a 1 to 10 scale, the sweepstakes, the holiday discount, the Mr. Brim patience level even, and then finance options, and then if it includes a swimming pool. What Mr. Brim's counseling service does: it teaches employees proper workplace etiquette when working at the Rustler building, for example. Mr. Brim will make sure that employees leave with the proper idea of how to act at a company. It allows employees to get a feel for their problems and learn not to take it out on the other employees when working at the company. Now, this is the ironic bit, because we were just talking about how Mr. Brim's been going a little bit crazy and his overloaded stress he's been taking out on our employees. So maybe he should be learning from that, Maybe I should show him this presentation. Okay, Mr. Brim hammers in the fact that good long breaks away from the desk are good, and that staying healthy is very important. Mr. Brim will not tolerate psychologically crazy or mentally unstable patients. Guidelines, rules, and conditions. You must wear a mask during counseling, since it is in office only. You cannot be wearing pajamas, for example. Do not destroy Mr. Brim's office, nor his equipment, or the swimming pool if applicable. Cash payment is not allowed. Instead, you will be required to do credit or check. After a session has begun, you cannot coax Mr. Brim into changing his patient's level, or crankiness level for that matter. Do not steal Mr. Brim's equipment. Do not write on the wall in Mr. Brim's office counseling area. Or do not raise voices over 80 decibels inside Mr. Brim's counseling area, which also applies to the building, which means you shouldn't be too loud because Rustler employees in the same building will get disturbed. Do not invite Mr. Brim to take a swim in the swimming pool with you. Do not access Mr. Brim's equipment. Do not eat all of Mr. Brim's food, which has been carefully locked away. Do not leave the counseling area until the session ends. Do not use the office phone except in an emergency. For example, if you need to call the police or 911. Do not rickroll Mr. Brim. Mr. Brim will provide you with his own food at the appropriate times. Do not bring outside food. The session will immediately end, and you will be dismissed angrily if you do not comply. The end. Thank you for attending the Mr. Brim Counseling Service presentation. Go to https://brimcounsels.rustler.com. Email brimcounsels@rustler.com. Go to 6 Counseling Way, Fort Worth, Texas 75033, or call 972-350-6883 toll free. And that concludes that presentation. Lights back on. All right. So there we have the Mr. Brim Counseling presentation. And, well, that just about concludes this meeting. Minimize that. Let's see, I'm going to add a little bit to this, just to say that the presentation went well. The Mr. Brim Counseling, actually no, I have one more list item to add. So I'm going to do a to-do here. So another thing we need to do is show actually no, we need to relay this info to Mr. Brim. So we need to get Mr. Brim to show his employees the Mr. Brim Counseling orientation presentation at the start of every counseling session. Actually, no, series. So that orientation presentation, for clarity, was the one that you just saw. Okay, so that's another thing we need to do. This will help employees not be so out of control during counseling sessions, and therefore will help to reduce Mr. Brim's stress. Okay, so we're going to get some ideas on this, and then we're going to conclude the meeting. Oh yes, Tigger. So I have an idea, please, and I would suggest getting an let's see here. Yes, I think that's a very good idea, actually. I think we should do that. I think we should. At the beginning of the meeting, I'll just send Mr. Brim the orientation presentation, and then it shows to every employee, and that actually be very useful, because if some of the employees go crazy, and Mr. Brim gets stressed out by that, and that will count toward our goal to devise a way to battle Mr. Brim, just like we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. So that's going to be good, so let's go ahead and do that. Alright, that seems good. Possible idea from Tigger. Okay. Present the presentation. Actually, no, let me start with send or email the presentation to Mr. Brim, so that he can show it to his employees at the start of every counseling series. This will help to lower noise levels around the Mr. Brim counseling area, and also count towards our goal to mellow Mr. Brim and make sure he doesn't shout at Rustler employees too much as a result of him being overloaded, just like the first assignment. Okay, so now we have an idea coming in from Pooh here, I see. Alright, so I have an idea on how we can maybe make it clear that employees really need to be good in these Mr. Brim Counseling meetings. So what we need to do is we need to show actually before we even show them the presentation to Mr. Brim, we need to make a few modifications to the presentation. So could you switch to the presentation screen, please? Alright, so go back to the first slide. So I would suggest, actually no, go to the fifth slide. The guidelines, rules and conditions. I would suggest making this a bit more strict so that employees don't bypass these rules, for example, like start rickrolling Mr. Brim, like start putting more warnings on here so that if you do this, you're going to get expelled forever. Stuff like that, just to make it a little bit more severe so that these employees, might not try to violate the rules and conditions, for example. So I also increase the express crankiness level to 7 or something, or this to 8, or that to 16, or yeah, you can put it 1 to 20 or something like that. Alright, sounds like a good idea, Pooh. Basically, just harshen the presentation so that employees might do a better job. Now, I do see some problems with that idea, though, which we'll talk about in a second. Possible idea from Pooh. Harshen the Mr. Brim Counseling Orientation presentation at the start of every, so that it stresses the fact that employees need to strictly comply to the guidelines, rules, and conditions slide in the presentation. Update the crankiness and the patience levels so that they now go on a 1 to 20 scale, and that even the lower level plans, like the express plan, for example, has a crankiness rating of about 10. Okay, now the problem with this, let me fix this typo first. Now the problem with this, though, is that Mr. Brim might not be, well, maybe he will, but we don't know. Mr. Brim, before I start typing, Mr. Brim might not be so into the fact to harshen the presentation so that we're even harder back over here on our employees than he's being. He may get dubious about that. He may be like, do we really want to be this harsh on our employees? You know, maybe that's something that he might think about. So that's something to consider on that idea, Pooh, so let me add that. But we can try it out and we'll see. Mr. Brim, let me see. However, Mr. Brim might become in doubt about this idea, since he might not want us to become even harder on our employees, in addition to the stress he is putting on them during his counseling sessions himself. Okay, but we'll see, and we can try that idea out. Okay, and that pretty much concludes this meeting. So again, we need to devise a way to mellow Mr. Brim and make sure he doesn't shout at Mr. Employees too much as a result of him being overloaded. We also need to create a system to monitor our employees during their sessions so that we know exactly how they're doing and that they're actually getting something out of these Mr. Brim counseling sessions, or may not be getting anything out of these counseling sessions. So we have some ideas to go over here. We also want to get Mr. Brim to show his employees the Mr. Brim Counseling Orientation presentation at the start of every counseling series. This will help employees to be not so out of control during counseling sessions, and will therefore help to reduce Mr. Brim's stress. There's some ideas there. So after this meeting, I'd like you three to go over these and do these ideas and, pick out those. I'll email you these documents and see which ideas would probably work best, and I'll go over those too. So, that basically concludes this Mr. Brim Counseling Meeting. See you later in the day. Good morning.